A question for Charles or Harald, just in terms of scientific researchers, going after scientific researchers and threats and all of that kind of thing, do you see any solutions to that?
Do I see a solution? No. I think the problem is that a lot of people who in my environment think like I do, or would actually say, well, this is good what you do. They don't speak up because they are afraid.
Professor Schippers, may I ask you some questions?
Yes, of course. What do you want to know, Rico?
One of the media people I spoke to, it's only those people who can afford to speak up that speak up. And I don't know how to change that.
I wonder, has Charles any comment on that?
Charles?
Yeah, I would say that in people at universities, we need to have stronger upfront university protections, as several of these speakers talked about what happens then. It must be that anybody who wants to speak the truth has the ability to speak the truth without losing their job, their friends, their reputation, their grass. We cannot tolerate that.
It's Harald Walach. I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. Thank you. Thank you for the nice talk you gave, and it was how the COVID-19 pandemic generates censorship. And so about these retracted studies, and these were your studies, or?
Yeah.
Can you tell a little bit more how that went? And also, you told us you lost your job. So I was really shocked because I've heard more scientists losing their job.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me here. I'm going to talk about two studies which I did together with my colleagues and some insight from media experts and other people who are interviewed as a consequence of that. I started out looking into the vaccine issue in roughly April 2021 when it started to come up, and we discovered in the Dutch pharmacovigilance data that there were about 4 deaths associated with 100k vaccinations and many side effects, of course. And so I wondered, this is the data which Wouter Aukema published on his blog. This is where the vaccination starts. This is all the other vaccinations since 2018. Deaths associated with all kinds of vaccinations and other things, and this year is when the COVID vaccination started. So I was really upset and thought, well, we need to put that in balance. And so we published, we analyzed the risks using the data from that study. That was the largest study to date at the time, with a lot of people being vaccinated in Israel, and we combined that with the pharmacovigilance data. These are the side effects from different European countries. This is the Netherlands, they report the most. This is the average of Europe here. So we published that in Vaccines. That's an online journal of MDPI. As you can see, 24th of June it was published, retracted on the 2nd of July. But it had more than 500,000 views up to now. Because Van Poyenbroek, who was the head of Dutch pharmacovigilance, protested and said these LARIP data should never have been used for that, because there is no causal interpretation, and they are not really well vetted. In that he lied, because he published a year before that 60% of all the cases he publishes in the LARIP database are actually vetted. And then there was a shitstorm for editors of about 300 and some editors of that journal threatened to withdraw, actually did withdraw. They were all conflicted, but that created a huge shitstorm at Poznan Medical University. I was affiliated with at the time. They cancelled my contract, and the German University of Wittenherdecke, where I was a visiting professor, also froze my professorship, and the paper was retracted. Well, I must maybe start by the fact that I have been freelance for quite a while already. So although I had half a position with Poznan Medical University, that was not my major income. It was just a very good affiliation, which I did lose as an effect of that first study that was retracted. And that was a study where we analyzed potential benefits of those COVID-19 vaccines in terms of mortality prevention. That wasn't easy because mortality was not an outcome of the studies that were used.
You mean the studies by Pfizer and...
Any studies. None of the studies published used mortality as an outcome. They all used symptomatic COVID-19 cases. But we were interested in real benefit, and real benefit is, does it prevent mortality? Because that's the question, isn't it? So we looked at data that came from a large Israeli study, more than 500,000 people, where you could actually assess mortality as an outcome because it was measured there. And then we calculated the absolute risk difference, which is the risk difference you see when you measure the people who died in the control group minus the people who died in the treatment group, right? And if you take that and compare it standardized on the number of people which you have in the study, then this is a very, very small absolute risk difference, because what is normally communicated is relative risk difference, right? So if you have two people dying in one group and one person dying in another group, then the risk difference is 100% nearly, yeah? But that's irrelevant if you know that 100,000 people have been treated. Right? So the absolute risk difference is what matters, and that's what we took from that Israeli study. And if you take that, then you can calculate the benefit in terms of mortality, and from that you can calculate about 6 people, 6 deaths you can prevent when you vaccinate 100,000 people. And if you look at the Dutch pharmacovigilance database, which we did at the time, you saw at the time 4 people, 4 fatalities related to COVID-19 vaccines, which is not caused but related to. And if you put that into proportion and you say, well, here you have 6 deaths which you can prevent, and here you have 4 deaths which you might incur, plus you have a lot of other side effects which we haven't even factored into the equation. And that is not a very good a risk-benefit analysis, and actually the point of our paper was not to say this is fact. The point was saying this is the best data which we have, which is bad data, so let's generate good data. That was the point of our paper, right?
Okay, and that was a reason to... What was the main reason to retract that they gave, or did they...
There was no reason which they gave. There were concerns raised. One was raised by Poenbroek, who was the head of, or is the head of pharmacovigilance of the Dutch pharmacovigilance database, and he said, we are not allowed to use the data for that purpose, which is, I think, a crap argument, because what do you use that data if not for raising concerns, if there are any, right? And then also he lied, I think, because he said the data he was using or they were preparing were not in any way vetted. But in a paper which he published a year before, he said 60% of all the data that go into the LAREP database are actually vetted and looked at by medical professionals. So either you cannot use those data, then you shouldn't even publish them, or you can use them, and we didn't use them for saying it's crap. We said there is a concern and we should do a proper study, because that was the point of our argument, right? So we used the data here to make the argument authorities, regulatory authorities or state authorities should set up good prospective documentation studies, because that is what you need if you want to find out about side effects, about benefits, about mortality and that sort of thing.
Of course, you also always need good data. And I think as a non-specialist, I've seen your paper, and that's what I got out of the paper. And interestingly, I have seen a lot of papers, also retracted papers. But what interests me is that the main outcomes are not, they don't want to study it, or there are no data available, or they don't gather the data on that. And if you do publish them, then they make, they don't want to hear it.
That is the point, right? I published that paper because I wanted to draw attention of the public to the fact that we do not have the data which we would need in order to make proper decisions. That's the point, right?
Right, right.
What should have happened was that right after the emergency admission of those vaccines, a prospective cohort should have been set up of, say, the first 1 million people vaccinated in Europe or so, and actively followed up for a couple of weeks, and then we would have known whether these vaccines are effective and safe.
And that didn't happen.
That didn't happen, and neither we know.
Okay, and so how did it feel as a scientist? Because you're trying to do good science, you're trying to, and then there's all kinds of, maybe allegations made, or I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very strange situation to be in, actually, because from my experience or from my feeling, this was not a huge thing which we did. It was just a simple rational argument using data that was published and saying, well, look, guys, we need to look at that. That was all we did. And it created an uproar. I didn't understand it at all. I mean, I was anticipating a kind of uproar because there's so much vested interest here, right? But comparatively, it is ridiculous what was happening. And the arguments that were raised were simply invalid. I mean, some people accused us of not being virologists. Now, I mean, what is that, I mean, I know more about big data than any virologist on this planet, probably, because I've analyzed huge amounts of data, right? So what argument is that? And then someone, as I said, Poinbrook said we are not allowed to use those data for that purpose. So what purpose is the data for, if not for that? So...
And why can't you use data? Because that's the whole point of science, also using data.
Data, of course. And so I think that the arguments were actually invalid. But the point was a shitstorm was being conjured up, and that produced pressure on the publisher. And there may also have been other pressures in the backstage which we don't know of, right? But. Three of some, I think 320 or so, editors threatened withdrawal from the editorial board. So they said they would be stepping down.
320? How many were on the editorial board?
320 are on the editorial board, and 3 of them or 4 of them said they would be withdrawing. So this is actually a tiny fraction, right? It's probably 1% or so.
Well, it doesn't happen. I've never heard of people resigning from the editorial board because of
sometimes, yeah, they do sometimes. But I mean, so what?
They threatened to resign from the editorial board because of that paper, or
exactly. That was.
I was hoping it was because of the paper was retracted, because they didn't agree with that.
No. The point was they threatened or already withdrew from the editorial board because they said the journal was publishing such a crap paper, and that's why we are stepping down. And this created a huge uproar. I was interviewed by a journalist from Science even, and they produced a fair piece, I must say. So she produced both sides, but that created the necessary social, I don't know what, the social activities that then brought the journal to the point where they said they were going to retract the paper.
Okay, and looking at all the scientific science that is sometimes being suppressed, there's also, you stood your ground somehow, and you said, I'm going to stand by what I did. I know a Swedish investigator, I forgot his name, but he was looking into the not school closures at Sweden, and then he said, well, none of the kids were harmed or died, and he was elated in his conclusions. I read his paper, and then he got so many hate mail that he decided to stop researching the topic altogether.
Mm-hmm. Well, I probably also got hate hashtags and stuff, but I didn't care, I didn't look. So there was a hashtag, apparently someone told me about me, saying what a crap scientist I was, but I never looked at the stuff. And I think this is probably also necessary, because you need to just do your thing and not care about what people think about it. I mean, if there is a valid reason why you're being criticized, then you should take it seriously and look at your stuff. But I didn't see any valid reason. I just felt social uproar And that is not a valid reason for scientists to stand by and step
True,
back.
but a lot of scientists think, oh, hey, I have an invested career, I have worked 30 years, and now my university sometimes also turns against them. Would there be any advice you would have for them?
I think that is a very difficult area because I'm at the end of my career, right? I mean, I've published some 210 papers, peer-reviewed, and I have my standing, and I know what I've done, and I'm not dependent on any acknowledgement by an institution or by anybody because I can make my living as I am, right? But there are, of course, people who have a mortgage to pay and children going to school, and they will probably make different decisions.
Or they have to,
Or they have to consider that.
consider that at least.
Yeah, I mean, I've conducted interviews and I've spoken with a media expert who has actually interviewed a lot of people, a lot of medical professors in Germany, and he told me, I've had a couple of people in front of the microphone who said critical things, and whenever I asked them, could I send that, could I broadcast that, they said, please don't mention my name. And he said to me, it's only people who can afford it who speak up. Then we did a study on face masks on children. A very simple measurement study. We measured carbon dioxide as children inhaled here with a little tube, and that was fed into a measurement device, and the measurement was taken by an oath-bound engineer who does that all the time. He knows what he's doing. And this is what we found. You can probably not see it because it's too light here, but this is the baseline, and then we had two types of masks crossed over, and this is about 13,000 parts per million carbon dioxide. There is no difference between the different types of masks. It's a little bit higher with FFP2 masks, but not really significantly so. And we thought we'd publish that, because this is important, because 2,000 parts per million is the safety limit, has been defined by many agencies, and if you breathe outside you have about 400 parts per million, and we measure after 3 minutes 13,000 parts per million under the face mask. So we published that. I contacted the editor of JAMA Pediatrics. He said, yes, send it, and he sent it through a review, 3 people, and then it was retracted again. I probably hold the record of, I'm done in 2 minutes, okay? I probably hold the record of papers retracted within 2 weeks or so. So this was again the same, a shitstorm. It was retracted because people didn't read the paper. I mean, they read the paper, but not the addendums and the stuff where all the technical details were in. So we published it again. It came out now in September in Environmental Research after another round of reviews, and it's out there now again. I did expert interviews and spoke to media specialists, and the basic findings which I noted here is media are actually not doing their job properly, because most people there, they are on short-term contracts, they implant scissors in their head. It's not so much about control, it's about self-control. And one of the media specialists said, I have a lot of people speaking to me who say that something is wrong, but they won't speak out. And this is something that you won't like, Peter, because it's a doctor practicing in the US I have spoken to, and he said he already in July 2019 identified people who had these symptoms that later showed up at COVID-19. He took their blood, froze it, and when SARS-CoV-2 came out, tested it, and they all tested positively. They were all from around Fort Detrick, but another virologist contradicted him. So my overall conclusion, I'm done here, is we are in the midst of a huge scientific fraud, I think. And everybody is hypnotized, so we should wake them up. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
And some people do take risks, and I know a couple of people who are being laid off in the Netherlands, or got a lot of pushback from the university. But thank you very much for, and I hope people find the courage to, because you can't fire all the scientists. Okay.
Of course.
Harald, I'd be interested to know if you could give more detail on the
process of how your papers were retracted, how the journal reacted?
That was very simple, actually. We got in each case we got an email on a Friday or Thursday or so. There have been concerns raised. Would you please address them? And they sent me the concerns. I addressed them in about 10-page paper. And on Monday they said we have looked at your reply. It's not sufficient. We are retracting the paper. That was it. And JAMA Pediatrics even said, we have received additional scientific review. I wrote to them 2 times, please send it to me. They never sent it.